The next presentation is by Frank Morton. He's going to be speaking on National Carbon Capture Center. Where has it been? Where is it going?
Thank you. I appreciate the opportunity to speak today and celebrate this big event with my good friends from SaskPower. We've been talking lessons learned the last couple of years, and I know that we'll continue on into the future. We've tested CANSOLV, and we've also tested the technology from Hitachi, so there's immediately a lot of things for us to talk about and look forward to discussions as you proceed with your test center and as we continue adding technology developers to our facility. Sorry I wasn't able to make it yesterday. I found that there's only one way to make it from Alabama to Regina, and if you have one plane with mechanical problems, you're not going to make it that day. So, so I had planned to meet with a lot of y'all, but I'm going to be here for 2 more days and hope to catch up with everyone that I missed yesterday. So the National Carbon Capture Center was actually started in the early 90s as the Power Systems Development Facility, a DOE-funded facility for the development of an IGCC technology. That technology has gone commercial. We're breaking ground in Kemper County. So 5 years ago, we decided to turn our focus to carbon capture instead of IGCC development, so we became the National Carbon Capture Center. So the facility on top is our pilot gasifier. That's the technology that's now starting up, transport gasifier in Kemper County. On the back end of that facility, we take syngas and deliver it to a facility for pre-combustion capture testing. But as we know, there's a lot more interest in post-combustion capture than pre. So when we started the NCCC, we added an additional facility at a PC plant, a pulverized coal plant, next to our gasifier, and able now to test post-combustion capture technologies also. So the graph at the bottom, the map of the U.S. at the bottom, is the Southern Company territory. We're the large utility in the southeast, focusing in that area. So we have the generous support from DOE of 80% of our funding. We have a good group of partners helping us with the other 20%. We have Duke Energy, AEP, and Luminant as our utility partners, Arch Coal and Cloud Peak as the coal companies, and of course with EPRI and DOE. It gives our technology developers a good industrial perspective on research towards a commercial product. Our focus is always on the large demos. We're happy to see the CANSOLV scale up at Boundary Dam, and that's our focus. Even though we're at a small scale, our focus on all our research is towards assisting the development of the large projects. And we don't do fundamental work. We're looking at design for commercial products. So that shows the niche that we have at the NCCC. We can scale up to about a 1 megawatt module. Most of our tests are in a quarter to a half a megawatt. We can test 8 different technologies at the same time. So stepping out of the lab and in an industrial setting is a very risky, expensive proposition. So with the infrastructure that's in place, funded by the DOE, we have a staff that has 20 years of experience of doing these type of projects. So we think that we can facilitate this risky move up the development curve. The Southern Company and all our partners are interested in large projects. We're involved in them, but the NCC itself focuses on projects up to 1 megawatt. So the photograph on the left is our post-combustion capture for the slipstream. You can see that we can test 5 at the same time. I listed the 5 that are there right now. We looked at solvents and enzymes and membranes and sorbents. So we're looking at a wide range of advanced technologies that we're hoping that can make advances towards cost-effective commercial products, and we have a good facility to do that as people come out of the lab. The photograph on the right is our larger test units. Number one, the facility is called a pilot solvent test unit, that we can take a solvent, up to 4,000 gallons of a solvent, and test in a unit that we have and run it ourselves. That stays totally full. There's a lot of solvents that are being tweaked, and there's a lot of advancements left to be made to improve solvents. And so to be ready in the near term for a commercial product, the amine solvents is obviously the first choice there in the near term. Unit 2 is a BASF Linde project. We can test up to 1 megawatt modules. They will be able to run for capacity runs up to 1.5 megawatts. So that'll be a good, useful expansion of their process development as they've tweaked their process to show improvements with their amine solvent. And number 3, which is much smaller on the ground, is an MTR membrane for about a 1 megawatt size. So I won't list all of these. The pre-combustion capture technology development is smaller than post-combustion, but it's very active. It's been a long term of active support by DOE, and we want to offer a place where they can step out of the lab and look at real flue gas. So we've tested a number of technologies, membranes, solvents, and we are commissioning now the OSU chemical looping. It's getting a lot of attention. So a good facility. Invite you to Alabama. A number of people that are going to visit Austin after this conference is going to swing by Alabama to see our facility. So everyone's welcome to come for a tour of our facilities. So we've been able to do it, and so it is difficult. It's difficult to step out of the lab and to scale up and to make a successful test in an industrial setting. But in the last 5 years, we've tested 25 different technologies from 20 different developers, and I'm talking to 30 or 40 more. DOE has had a series of FOAs over the last couple of years, so there's a good pipeline of technologies that are headed to us, and as we test them at the NCCC and scale up there, certainly we'll be talking to our international test network for larger projects here at SaskPower or at TCM or elsewhere. So I think it's a good test network of facilities that we have established now, and showing some successes as we get moving. So I've said most of that. It's just we're off to a good start, and in just a couple of years, we're off and running. Just signed a contract with DOE to continue for the next 5 years for in June. So we're very happy about that. I just got the thumbs up from Julio, so I'm pleased with that. And then we have run gasification for a number of years. We've been running since the mid-'90s on gasification. So for those of you that are interested in gasification, we have a lot of expertise in that area and want to talk to you about that also. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Frank. Our next speaker is Max Ball. He's going to talk about the SaskPower carbon capture test facility and next generation technologies.
Well, good morning, everybody. It's a pleasure to have an opportunity to share with you some ideas. It's interesting that they have given me 10 minutes to share with you my knowledge of the future. I'm not sure what we're going to do with the other 9 minutes. But realistically, the future is really what we make it. It's going to be the combined effort of the people in this room and others in the world who have the same notions as this group here today has. And if we look at what are the opportunities, what are the abilities, where's the fundamental information coming from, as in reference plants, if we look at vision, if we look at social support, and if we look at social need. I'm sorry about putting in front of you in the morning a complex table, but it seemed like the fastest way to get through this list of things. So if we look at those categories in SaskPower, certainly there's an opportunity. There's a coal fleet that is either out of business or fitted with carbon capture over time. And as you all know, we're located near enhanced oil recovery opportunities, and those two things are a good fit. In terms of ability, I think SaskPower has a proven track record now in developing and delivering on carbon capture projects. We also have other activities that support the growth of CCS in this region, R&D work in progress, our collaboration with others, and so forth. In terms of reference plant, the best lab in the world for understanding post-combustion capture right now is just in the process of filling a pipeline of CO2 from Boundary Dam. In terms of vision, well, we've got a coal fleet, we've got a schedule, we're going to go after it. In terms of social support, we're very, very fortunate here in Saskatchewan. Saskatchewan recognizes the benefits that are available through carbon capture and storage, and I'm realizing that that is not a universal situation. And in terms of social need, there's no question. The world needs viable technical options for greenhouse gas management. Now, the next column over here is the CCS community in general, and there are some similarities and some differences between these two columns. So certainly there is a global coal fleet. There are throughout the world a number of opportunities for EOR, not unlimited. There are things like emissions trading schemes and so forth. So there are opportunities. There certainly is ability. Let's look around the room here, and all the people who have come to this event represent organizations with amazing abilities. There are reference plants in the works: Kemper, Quest, Petronova, Peterhead, Future Gen 2, Green Gen, White Rose, and on. Lots of real projects that are on the doorstep and about to get going. In terms of vision, again, there is a strong global vision for CCS. There are people engaged in project development. There are people who are doing program developments. There are people who are doing product developments. There are people who are looking at long-run technologies, people that are looking at health, safety, and environment. There is a vision. Social support, yeah, that one's not universal. Some areas are more blessed than others with social support. And of course, the social need is global. The world needs solutions. The options that we have for a greener future, and there's a list of them. You can use less energy, and there's a number of ways of doing it. You can engage in the wind, solar, tidal initiatives. You can look at large-scale deployment of hydro. There's nuclear power, and there's carbon capture and storage. And we could talk about the limitations of each one of those things. There's social attributes that are plus and minus on all of those. There are limits of the extent to which you can develop them, and each of them has their unique time frames. The perspective that we bring here today is on carbon capture and storage, and that's the one that we think has huge potential to make a difference to the world. And when we talk about carbon capture and storage, as Peter alluded to, there are lots of ways to go about it. And we could spend a whole day, pick any one of these lines, we could spend a whole day talking about the obstacles that they have to meet, the technical obstacles that they have to meet, the non-technical obstacles they have to meet, what their limitations will be, and when they might be available to become a solution. But of course, and I hope by the time I'm finished here, you'll understand why SaskPower is currently focused on advanced amine solvents. And in support of that initiative, of course, we have the carbon capture test facility. in partnership with Mitsubishi Hitachi Power Systems. We've been able to start construction, and we're about 70% complete on construction now. We will begin testing some advanced technologies. My time is running short here, so I'm going to have to move a little quicker than I planned here, but this is the best laboratory that the world has at the moment to understand the post-combustion capture technology and what it's going to take to make it better. I want to talk a little bit about a learning curve. I looked at a lot of models, but I think this is maybe the best one. The very first commercial application of steam technology was developed by a fellow named Newcomen a while back. His system worked. It wasn't very efficient. It ran about 0.5% thermodynamic efficiency. Another fellow came along and really worked very hard to understand the fundamentals of why that system worked and how it could be made to work better. And the Watt system came in at about 5 times better, 2.5% efficiency. So from the first deployment to the second deployment was an amazing improvement. The improvements after that, too, were dramatic. High-pressure steam in the 1920s, single reheats in the 1940s, Eddystone Power Station 1960, and so forth down the curve. But I want to talk about the first part of that curve, the first part and the second part. And then, of course, we got the nth out here as well. So looking forward and talking about CCS, and if we take a shape of a similar curve, we got a group of technologies that have not yet been built. We've got a group of technologies that first of a kind is in place, and we've got technologies where we're on the doorstep to second of a kind. And we could be plotting cost, risk, schedule, performance, any of those things. So first of a kind, we're on the doorstep. Industry is on the doorstep to seeing the first of a kind oxy-fuel, IGCC, and so forth. We're on the doorstep of seeing second of a kind post-combustion, as in our boundary dam units 4 and 5. And then we got a group of everything else. So why are we focusing on post-combustion for boundary dam 4 and 5? Because we're a lot further down the learning curve. I wanted to also talk briefly about some classical project management theory, proven fact. When you start out on a project, you have an estimate of what it's going to cost, plus B% minus A%, and A and B are not equal. And as you move forward through the project, move further towards completion, you move towards complete certainty on what that project is going to cost. I want to just point out that if you're doing first of a kind, that shape is a little bit different. There's more room for upside surprises as you move towards completion. And that's another reason why we want to build on our experience in post-combustion to take us through to the second generation. So if we look at life cycle costs, we've got boundary dam, we've got CCTF, and we're going to hit boundary dam 4 and 5. And how are we going to get there? Time doesn't permit me to go through this list, but we have a long list of activities that we need to go through over the next 2 years in order to build the robust business case that will let us move forward with a plan for boundary dam 4 and 5. This chart gives a quick synopsis of the opportunities for CCS at SaskPower. We've got boundary dam units 4 and 5 where the initial investment decision needs to be made in 2016, final investment in 2019. That date is driven by regulation. The other units you can see are a little further out, but we know the schedule. So that's where we need to go. How are we going to get there? We're going to do right sizing. We're going to expand the EOR market. We're going to maintain that social connection that we've got. And on the basis of experience, we're going to reduce the cost for these future projects. And I think we will get yes to the future. And the immediate future, boundary dam 4 and 5, a little bit bigger version, but looks a lot like what we've got at Boundary Dam. And I'm sorry, I think I might have run a few minutes over.
Thank you very much, Max. We'll see the future tomorrow, I guess. Are we going to see anything of the tidal power in Saskatchewan as well? The final speaker is John Gibbons, and John's going to be talking on building the momentum to advance and collaborate on CCS next generation.
Okay, thank you very much. Well, I'll try and get through quickly. That was a pretty hard act to follow there, with a real power plant to play with. You've got a lot to brag about. So I'm from the UK CCS Research Centre. It's a virtual centre covering most academics working on CCS in the UK, funded by the EPSRC and also by DEC for some of our research facilities. We've been going for about 2.5 years. Okay, so there were some questions posed somewhere in the genesis of this session. What is the single most important technical improvement needed? What different scenarios of operation will future technologies need to be adapted to? And what opportunities do the technologies of tomorrow provide? And I wanted to add a few things to that. A strand that's come up, people have talked a little bit loosely about second-generation technologies and third-generation technologies. And I think it's quite important in this dialogue to understand the difference between a novel technology and the difference between a second and a third generation technology. And we have seen that. Max pointed out very clearly that the second generation and the third generation will be better, successively better. It's not clear whether a novel technology that hasn't actually gone further than its first generation or won't be going further than its first generation will be better than the second and third generations of existing technologies that it has to compete with. So generation does mean something. It means successive related stages. It doesn't just mean a novel technology. It's incorrect to say that a novel technology that's coming along in a while will necessarily be second generation. It's also incorrect to assume automatically that they'll be better. They may be, we hope they will be, but it isn't given. So the main sort of message in my presentation is in this diagram, and I think it's worth looking at in a little bit of detail. This is something that was produced by Mike Farley, who used to work for Doosan Babcock back in the UK. We're looking here at sort of a fairly classic innovation chain going through nominally linearly from R&D, developing your prototype, going forward, scaling up through demonstration, and eventually to deployment. And it can be thought that research really only happens at the left-hand end of the diagram. You do the research and then you pass it on to people in industry and they run away with it. Well, actually, we haven't actually seen it happening like that, and it certainly doesn't happen like that if you want to get the optimum results. You've got a constant series of feedback of R&D needs, things that people want to know. This is not sometimes pejoratively called applied research. It's often actually looking at much more interesting problems than academics can think up for themselves. You know, this is reality. Reality has a habit of being awkward and difficult and requiring significant mental energy to get on top of. And then also, obviously, feeding forward the results of that by a range of different means to get to the end people, the people who can use it. Quite often, this is actually seconding people. It may be trying to tell people, but it's certainly a lot more than saying, put a paper in a journal. You know, how many times do you sit down and read exhaustively through the literature, Max, when you... Well, maybe you do, but, you know, you want to make sure that the results get there. And this is something that we're doing through a process called rapid research and pathways to impact delivery. And we think about it in 3 stages, fairly logically, which is updating the knowledge requirements, actually generating the knowledge by various means, and then delivering the knowledge out there, and then also underpinning it with capacity, people, experimental facilities. This is just looking into the 4 elements. I think, given the time is short, I won't go through them in detail, but I will point out that knowledge generation and management can include research and development, but it can also include just pulling together existing knowledge. And I think that's quite an important activity to realise that as we're moving forward, there's a lot of knowledge there. It isn't always just about running your test rig, doing some work in the lab. It's often just about getting a sensible synthesis. And meetings like this are something that can help us to do that. Max said, oh, you could spend a day on different strands looking to see what's needed. Well, this is actually a big part of RAPID. One of the things we did when we started out is to go through into lots of different areas of CCS application and look to see what knowledge was required in those areas and how well we knew it. This was a first pass through. I would very much like to go back and spend at least one day with Max and some other colleagues looking at, say, post-combustion capture. What do we need to know? What do we know? So it's important sometimes to know what you do know as well as what you don't know. Then you don't go away trying to work it out. And this is very definitely part of the process. Go into an area, drill down. I think the original question that said, what's the one most important thing, clearly isn't entirely appropriate. There's a lot of important things. But you do need to drill down and get down into a lot of detail on these different areas. I'm not even going to show this, discuss this, but we've carried through on the idea that you need to look at lots of different areas by building on the RAPID handbook and the ideas that we got there for research to cover research in a lot of different areas. And again, something I think that brings over a message in the presentation is this diagram, which tries to get an impression, to give an impression of the different paths in CCS, the different ways you can take. This is actually a great strength of carbon capture and storage. I mean, I've had people, journalists, ask me very recently, what is the chance that carbon capture and storage doesn't work? Well, actually, the chance is incredibly low because we've got very many different options. There's a very good chance that some of them won't work. I mean, it's all certain that some of the paths won't work. But it's a diverse range of technologies, many different ways of coming at the same point. But that, of course, means that you've got to do a lot of different research activities to support that. And these red stars cover the different projects and the different areas in which they're working. And you can see that apart from the CCS chain itself and the technology, there's some underpinning cross-cutting activities, safety, gets a lot of attention, environment, regulation, public acceptance, policy, financial. Lots of different areas that cover the whole chain. So I think it's important to think about it in that context. I just wanted to show that we do have a few toys as well. I'm glad I put this in, otherwise I'd feel severely upstaged with some of the presentations we had. This is a facility that was funded by DEC and also by EPSRC. It's a 1 tonne a day post-combustion capture unit. And I think our claim to fame in the world at the moment is that we're the only place where you can actually take gas turbine flue gases from 300 kilowatt gas turbines we've got and feed them through an amine post-combustion unit. We also have a conventional combustor which will run on air or also in oxy-fuel mode. So we've got a lot of flexibility here. So it's small, but we can have some fun with it. So back to the questions. We're looking at novel and second and third generation technologies, bearing in mind that they're different, but both important. And in many areas of the CCS delivery chain, we don't believe there's one big thing. There's a lot of different things, and that's our strength. And we also believe that it's very important to look at cross-cutting areas. The RAPID approach is being developed with help from our independent advisory panel, which is our industry contact group, and also the Carbon Capture and Storage Association, or industry. But more experience is welcome. And as I say, if people do want to come and spend a day talking in detail, and probably quite a good dinner afterwards, talking in detail about a particular area of technology, we would love to talk with you. We really would. It's got to happen. We've really got to get academics, researchers, and CCS practitioners, people who are starting to get experience, working together to identify and implement meaningful research. What's important for research into new technology to deliver? Well, I've tried to break it down into a few areas, and I think reducing risk is something that's come up as a consistent theme. Reducing uncertainties in predicting cost and performance, and I do hope with nth of a kind it's the same shape, but you maybe even narrow it down a bit at the start of the funnel. Certainly reduce cost and performance. Thank you.
Thank you, John. We've got a few minutes now to ask a few questions, and I'll just kick it off by actually mirroring John's question, which he posed to himself, which was, what's the single most important improvement needed? And let me phrase it a slightly different way, because as John rightly said, there's a lot of improvements needed. But you've got limited time and limited budget, so what are you going to focus on? Where's the biggest bang for the buck? So maybe I'll not let John speak to that. He's already said something on that. So, Peter, would you like to comment on that?
Yeah, my feeling would be it's non-technical. That might surprise you, but we believe that the technology is well advanced to bring it forward. What we are missing is just the economic framework, and we are missing the public acceptance. So especially in Europe, when we're talking about CCS, it's impossible to store onshore, which means you have to go offshore with the storage, which drives cost upwards. And so also governments are not very happy to speak about CCS, but they like to speak about renewable energies. They ignore the energy mix issue, and therefore CCS is not high on the agenda. So it's more all these kind of non-technical issues which needs the most innovation, I would say, to bring it across the line.
No, I think I agree on it that we need a good framework on the financial side, but it's also, I think it's important that if you look into the investments cost and the energy cost, it varies also quite a lot on where you are in the world and what kind of application we are working with. So I think it's very hard to say that we will focus on just one issue. I think we need to work with both investments cost and operation cost for CCS.
Frank?
Yeah, yes, I agree with the others that it's not so much a technical issue because there's a lot of technical issues depending on the niche of the project you're deploying. But in addition to government support and the economics, it's also the commitment of the organizations doing the research. The leadership that SaskPower has shown and the leadership that Southern Company has shown in putting partnerships together and getting teams together and to share information where you haven't shared before. This is such a large effort, both technically and economically, that it's going to take partnerships where people haven't so much experienced partnerships in the past. The Southern Company has always built power plants on our own. We know how to build power plants, and we can build them well and be efficient with that. But CCS is completely different. We want to share the progress that we're making with others, and I think it's a partnership beyond just government support and political incentives. It's the corporations and it's the actual research communities partnering together where they haven't so much in the past.
Max?
From my perspective, whether it's a social challenge or a technical challenge, social challenge or technical challenge, the underlying issue is the lack of hands-on experience with the real thing. And I think that once that experience is known, both the social and the technical challenges become a lot easier to manage.
John, do you want to come back?
If I could just come in, I mean, there is one place in Europe where CCS is valued, at least, and that's in the UK. We have an arrangement called electricity market reform, which gives essentially the same subsidies to CCS, certainly the same mechanism, as it gives to renewables and to nuclear. And that really does make a difference, and we're used to offshore storage. And I just hope that the UK manages to carry through CCS on behalf of Europe at the moment, because clearly, unless you're lucky with Maasvlakte, where we're going to be carrying the flag. What I would say, though, on that I think is a general feature, and it has come up a number of times, it's not necessarily a research question, but it's certainly a communication question. And this, I think, is centered around the need to communicate that CCS is different, and that difference makes it valuable. And it's different in at least two ways. It's different in that it uses a fuel, and we've had a question in the UK that comes up, well, why don't you come up with a sort of essentially a fixed price for electricity from CCS so we can compare it directly with renewables? And that misses the fact that by having a variable cost, the variable cost of a fuel, it exposes you to future fuel price uncertainty, but also because you've got a fuel, if you decide not to run the plant, you can save quite a lot of money. And it's just this thing about being different. And then also, I think the big difference that we're not communicating very well on carbon capture and storage is that it addresses the problem of fossil carbon getting into the atmosphere directly. And we don't actually challenge renewable technologies and nuclear and energy efficiency enough with saying, well, look, yes, you're not actually producing any CO2 at the time, but what are you doing to stop fossil carbon getting into the atmosphere in the long run, bearing in mind that we're trying to limit cumulative emissions? So I think something about the difference in CCS, communicating that is really quite important.
There's a question there in the audience. There's a microphone at the back there. If you wouldn't mind using that, because the acoustics aren't that brilliant for questions. And if you could identify yourself as well, please.
Hi, yeah, I'm Jeff Brown, and I'm head of finance and strategy for a power developer in the U.S. called Summit Power. And let me just preface the question by saying, as opposed to science, you know, a developer lives or dies by ability to actually put hardware on the ground and get projects done. And so this is a plea for reassurance to the distinguished scientists, especially on current technologies. If you want to get down the experience curve that Max discussed, you have to do a lot of projects. Certainly in the US, there's a good 1/3 of the country with coal plants where you can get a price for carbon for EOR, like zip code 30 to 40 bucks a ton. There are two obstacles to getting the reassurance, and this is the plea for reassurance is that most of you are scientists and engineers, so your job is to hold out the golden future, you know, that we can get down the curve, and there's all kinds of great things we can do, transformative technologies. You see, I want the opposite, so that's the plea for reassurance. What I need is two things. Number one is I need relatively a hard cost. You know, if you tell me you can retrofit me a good coal plant, zip code $1.5 million per megawatt hour, and roughly 25% parasitic load, I can do plants all day. So I need a cost and performance, but the second thing I need is to find customers. They do not want to look stupid, and this is where I need the reassurance. What I need is a sense that they do not want to be the guy who bought the $200,000 Tesla and the battery catches on fire, and then 2 years later, the price is $40,000. First, they felt cool in front of all the neighbors, they have a Tesla, and then they feel really stupid because they're the one who bought it for $200,000 instead of $40,000. So I want some sense from you guys. What do you think about the actual potential for giant cost improvements in current post-combustion capture, you know, amine or ammonia? If we go out and try to convince somebody to do a project, 2 years later, is the cost going to be down to, you know, $200,000 a megawatt to retrofit? So can you kind of address what's the level of cost improvements in the real world that we are now discussing? Thanks. Sorry for the long question.
Okay, well, that's the $640 million question. And more, yeah. Max, do you want to start off with it?
Well, I believe that you caught my opinion when I said that we are going to be focusing on advanced amines. We've got a good model at Boundary Dam, and certainly we're going to do a lot of work to take the learnings from that and continue on the same pathway. We're not foreseeing in the near term a radical switch to some of the esoteric technologies and concepts that are in the pipeline. If your customer wants to wait until all the opportunities are gone and all the pipelines are filled with somebody using a relatively boring technology, he might be able to get something whiz-bang after the markets have been filled.
Peter, do you want to? Okay, Peter, then John.
I think what is the key point is that we need to distinguish between the cost and the price. And the key difference is that when you want to bring the cost for the user down, so for a power utility buying on it, it's important that you have a competition on the market, that you do not have a single supplier of technology. This is much more important than what is the real cost reduction, as the cost reduction That makes you a little bit more competitive. But if there is no competition on the market, you can just calculate what is the willingness of your customer to pay for it. And we have seen it, for example, in Europe on renewable energies, where we have a feed-in tariff. So you can clearly, as a supplier, calculate what is the profit margin of the customer, and therefore there is no incentive to go down with the price. As you know, well, he still makes a two-digit profit, why should I lower my price? So having this in mind, I believe it is much more important to understand, will the 5, 6 suppliers stay on the race? And if yes, I would believe we will see a typical learning curve, and you can just use the typical learning factors. If we would see a significant reduction, though, that a number of suppliers would withdraw from the further development of CCS, then I would expect the prices might even go up, and especially in markets where there might be no alternative to it, as you have an emission performance standards, you either build nothing or the price doesn't matter.
John, do you want to come in?
Yeah, I mean, I guess in terms of what might actually be happening, capital costs, I could imagine with practice, would go down maybe as much as 50%. I mean, Max, I don't know if he actually mentioned the figure of 30% reduction for the second boundary down, but that's what people are talking about. Obviously depends on the scale, depends where you get your kit made. I mean, if we can start importing some of the components from China, costs might go down significantly, capital. In terms of the people looking stupid, one thing you didn't mention, which you might want to consider if we're going down the solvent route particularly, is that actually you can back out the technology and get some of the advantages of new technology by upgrading as you're going along at relatively low cost. You obviously can't do anything about what you paid for the capital, but at that point, well, you've got there first in the market, so maybe you've got a better price for your CO2, because in the longer run, presumably the price for CO2 will match what it costs, plus a little bit of margin. So,
Switching solvents.
Absolutely, yeah, switching solvents, yeah. I think that's something you need to take into account when you say, you know, are we getting the best one today? You are getting the best one today, but you may also be able to get the best one tomorrow, but obviously you will have locked in the capital cost. But hopefully you've locked in your your CO2 price for a period as well, so maybe you're okay.
Frank, did you want to make any comment on this?
Well, I'm going to have to pun on this one, but we certainly agree with the two needs that you identified. It's something that Southern companies are working towards hard. We need to establish a price, and we need to protect the customers as we go forward. So something we want to do, and we're working towards, but don't have any answers yet for you.
Ola?
Yes, I think what is also important here is that we have to look into the new technologies. A little bit back to your Tesla. Tesla is very popular in Norway because there is no tax on them, which have now forced Volvo to introduce special Volvos to Europe or to Norway, tailor-made them for Norway to get into the market again. And I think what we also need to do in CCS is to push these new technologies, because that is the way that we can also push the existing suppliers to really optimize their process continuously. So I think one thing is to work to optimize the existing system, learn how to construct it, but we should never forget the next generation, because that is what is really pushing the technology further.
There's another question at the back there.
I'm not on the panel, but I thought I'd add a comment to this one. From SaskPower standpoint, we've done this first one, which had a certain cost. I will comment that the CCS part of the project was closest to being on budget. It was very close to being on budget, and I'm suggesting maybe 5% within that range. So it was an orderly project from the standpoint of cost certainty. We really see this next project, BD 4 and 5, and we're going to be going through an exercise here in the next couple of years of harvesting information from BD 3. And it's not just us, it's also our partners who have been involved with executing this project and various people involved, as well as information that's coming from a number of the organizations that have been talking today. But we think there's a real opportunity to lower the cost. So the embarrassment factor decreases over time here. And from our standpoint, there's going to be a step reduction in that risk, that particular risk, when we go through our BD 4 and 5 exercise, and that's the development process we're really entering into in the next 2 to 3 years. So there's talking about it, and then there's doing it, and we're going to be doing it. So our plan at SaskPower is to immediately move into that next exercise, and it will likely be some of these technologies that are more advanced. Things like energy penalty, we're seeing that as being less of an issue than it once was. What we're seeing is things like capital cost reduction, operating cost reductions. What do we do to achieve those things? And we really have a laser-like focus on those particular factors. And it's a practical thing. I'm a project manager. I'm an engineer as well, but I'm really focused on delivery, lowering costs, shortening schedules, simplifying commissioning, all of those things. That's our whole exercise at SaskPower. It's all about that thing that you raised, and it's a very pertinent question from those of us that are actually on the ground doing things. Is that's exactly the stuff that has to happen. Predictability, those step change improvements, something you can go out and say, here's what it's going to cost, and we think it's going there. And there's a lot of factors that are very, very straightforward. Some of them are structural, economies of scale. Some of them will be technology related, but these things, we're seeing all these opportunities right now. So that's our next step at SaskPower, and there will be research and there'll be new technologies, and we're really looking forward to being able to get those incorporated and involved. But there's a lot of things that are not technology related that we see as the next steps here.
Well, thank you for those comments. I guess there's no question there. Any other questions? We've got just a couple of minutes. Yep, Dick.
Dick Wells from ANLIC R&D in Australia. We probably haven't got time to deal with this question, Peter. I'm going to put a question to you. We've heard a lot from the panel.
I don't think they're allowed to the chair, but anyway,
I'll take the liberty, won't I? We've heard a lot from the panel today about what's happening in the capture side. I guess certainly from an Australian perspective, we're sort of reorienting some of the limited funds we have to deal with the constraints posed by storage. I mean, given your background, Peter, in terms of the future and where you see these things are, where do you think the major gains can be made in that area?
All right, well, I think the gains are by taking a more pragmatic approach to it. I think to ensure that we don't have an undue level of regulation, that actually has a level of regulation that's commensurate with the level of risk, rather than having a level of regulation that's covering the backsides of risk-averse governments or whatever. So I think that's an important part where there's real gains to be made. I think high grading is going to be a necessary part of the strategy in the future, and as I think I said yesterday, I think that really means that for the most part we're going to be putting CO2 into basins that are oil and gas bearing or have been oil and gas bearing, because that's where you have the knowledge base. And the biggest single problem at the moment is when you start in brownfield areas, you've really got to come up the exploration curve without having the incentive of $100 a barrel oil. And so that's a major problem that I think we have to avoid. So those are some of the gains. Further out, are there gains from things like horizontal drilling and fracking to produce permeability and low permeability systems? Maybe, but that's further out. I think something that needs to be investigated. Sorry, John, yes, please.
Yeah, I mean, we had a body called the Cost Reduction Task Force in the UK, which you may be familiar with, and the biggest gain they had a very small gain actually in technology, really unbelievably small, but they had a big gain from economies of scale in transport and storage. And I think the innovation that's required there is actually a business model to do that. And we've got this kind of systematic failure in that it would be oil and gas companies that would really handle that, but of course it's not their sort of business. Now they've got the expertise, but not the incentive. And I think coming up with some way where effectively you put in a sewage system for CO2 would be the way to reduce the cost. But I mean, you know, sewage systems are very important, but they're not glamorous, and neither is the CO2 disposal system. But it's quite necessary. And I think probably, in a sense, the innovation here really would have to come from government. And I think if governments want to see large-scale carbon capture and storage, then it's a part of the infrastructure that, at least during its rapid development phase, traditionally we've seen governments taking a hand in getting that delivered. And I think the cost reductions there are pretty much guaranteed. No, they're not. You can see them happening just because of the scale. Do the sums. But I do take the point that Peter made about exploration and getting the storage in hand, and we are also in the UK finding it difficult to see how you would do the necessary exploration so far in advance of the demand.
Does anybody else on the panel want to make any comment on that? Quick comment, because we have to finish pretty soon. Any final comments there from the panel? Did you want to make? Yep.
Yeah, I would fully agree to John. I think transport and storage needs much more action from the governments, as the size of the investment required is so enormous, and the uncertainty if there will be someone who wants to get rid of his CO2 is big. And just to balance it out, it cannot be done by a private investor typically. So you need state action to get it organized. For sure, we need to be careful that state action is not done without thinking on where's the sources and where's the sinks. So it needs to be well aligned with real projects, so that the likelihood that something is going forward is achieved.
If I can just make one final comment there and say the other innovation, I would say, is a more open attitude to the potential for enhanced oil recovery. There's a conventional wisdom in Europe. There's no opportunities for EOR. There's conventional wisdom in Australia. There's no opportunities for EOR. I think that needs to be challenged a little bit more vigorously, quite frankly. And I think that would help to actually get more projects going. I think we're going to have to finish there and go to the next talk. I'd ask you to join with me in thanking the panel, and thank you also to the questioners for a very interesting session. Thank you.